Hey revolutionaries, I'm excited to bring you this week's episode with Branden Christensen, where we're talking seismology and citizen science. Yes, I know you've been waiting for this episode to talk about seismology. Actually, Branden's got a great story I'm super interested in too because it involves science. It's cool. And he's bringing science to the masses where he's designed using the Raspberry Pi platform, which is a little electronic computer device. He's designed basically portable seismographs, things that measure the Earth's movement, and you can buy one as a hobbyist, a few $100s, and the cost has come down, and it's super cool that citizens can be involved now, or professionals at a different level, at a smaller level, more decentralized networking level. It's really incredible what he's been able to pull together the last few years. And interesting, he's got an interesting story how he came from New York and found himself down in Ecuador, Panama, and now Costa Rica. Doing the development. Anyways, it's a great story. I can't wait for you guys to listen to it. But before we get there real quick, I have a couple updates. Yes, I have an update here, and one is big news that Podfest Asia is coming back, and I'm going to try to get the website so I get the details right here. Okay, here are the dates. Okay, here's the information for Podfest Asia. You can go to the website, podfestasia.com, and it will forward to this website under Podfest Expo. Of course, it's being held in Manila, the Philippines, April 1st, 2025. April 1st, 2025, Manila, Philippines. Podfest Asia is kicking off again. One-day event, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., at the One Ayala West Tower. So if you're in the Philippines for April 1st, this is not a joke. Those Americans that think everything is a joke on April 1st, but it's really happening, and there are featured speakers. Todd Cochran from Blueberry will be there. Aya Schlachter from MGS Global. Special guest, Pia Cayetano will be there, who's one of the very popular senators of the Philippines. She will be there. So those are the big announcements. Believe it or not, I'm looking at the 2025 speaker list, and there's this guy, Jim Cirillo, that's on the list from Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. So he will be speaking as well. That means I better get my button gear and pull something together for it. Anyways, if you're in the Philippines, hopefully I will see you there. So that's one big update. Second big update is I am totally anxiety-ridden right now because I just put down a deposit on rebuilding my websites. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I've been needing to do it for a while, but I'm going to change hosts for my podcast. I'm going to get new websites for the podcast website and for my Jimjim group website. And I don't know how I'm feeling. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by it, by the process, actually. Because that means I have to think hard about what I want to put on the sites and what I want them to look like. And I'm not like a big marketing designer guy, but I'm being forced to do it. But I think I have a good group that I'm working with and to do it. So that's the other update. So keep your eyes open for new website updates. I'll let you know when they're fully up and running, but that's going to be happening within the next few weeks. So anyways, remember, April 1st, Podfest Asia, Philippines, Manila, Philippines, One Ayala Center. See you there. But right now, let's get to Branden's episode right here.
Welcome to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, the show that explores reinvention in the digital age as it relates to career, creativity, and technology. Stay tuned for interviews with professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives that have reimagined success and are making a pivot. If you'd like to listen to the entire back catalog, visit jimjimsreinventionrevolution.com for instant access. And now, here's your host, Jim.
Hey everybody, hey, it's Jim, and welcome to episode 121 of Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. I'm talking today with Branden Christensen, and we're talking seismology, citizen science, and more. So, Branden, welcome to the Reinvention Revolution.
It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me, Jim.
Thanks for jumping on. I really appreciate it. And before we jump into Raspberry Shake, as it's called, can you tell me what's the temperature where you are right now.
Oh, okay. So in Fahrenheit for your audience,
Yes.
it's early in the morning, so it's probably around 80 degrees right now.
Oh my God.
It'll get up to 100 today though.
Wow,
And
really?
I'm coming in from Costa Rica today.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to, it's winter time in North America, so I just want everybody to know, Brandon's bringing a ray of sunshine for us all, and I'm still in North America for the moment, and hopefully I'll be getting to Southeast Asia soon here before the winter's over. But thanks for sharing that, because that's just fun to understand where people are hanging out and where things are coming from. But so let's dig into this Rasberry Shake situation. Okay, this is the business that you've started, and the citizen science that you're, I guess, decentralizing and disseminating throughout the world. And that's kind of really interesting to me. And that's something that, obviously is available now that probably wasn't available just tens of years ago, fives of years ago. So what's going on with Rasberry Shake? Tell me about it.
Well, Raspberry Shake is it's a network of citizen scientists and hobbyists, educators, and even professionals. We bring together all those audiences into a single community, and then everyone who's inside that community hosts a Raspberry Shake, either in their institute, their office, their home, or their school. And the Raspberry Shake is a gizmo or a gadget that's very sensitive. It's designed for detecting Earth motion. And so this has created the largest seismic network that exists today, so larger than any government network. In the United States, you're probably familiar with earthquake information coming from the United States Geological Survey.
Sure.
And that every country around the world has their own USGS. And what we've done is for the very first time, created a seismic network that was entirely complementary to the government networks, but separate, and really empowers anyone to be part of the network and to contribute data and to contribute to science.
So let's just explain this a little bit for people listening out there. So when you say it's a gadget, it's basically a little bit of electronics. It's a sensor. It's a seismograph, right? Is that what you would call it, essentially?
That's right. It's a seismograph, and it's an incredibly sensitive device. And so it's everything in a single box. Let's say it's the size of a sandwich.
Okay, so not that big.
And inside that, not that big. Inside of this is a tiny little computer that has a sensor mounted to it, and it converts the information from that sensor into a signal that's then sent over the Ethernet or over Wi-Fi to a central server. And that signal, that what it's measuring, is the representation of how the Earth is moving beneath your feet in any moment. And it's got quite a bit of magic in it, because you can be where you are. I think you are in Ohio, right?
Right. Northern Ohio.
Yeah, so you're northern Ohio. You're in a part of the United States where it's not very seismically active, but there's still earthquakes happening all over the world all the time.
Right.
And so the sensor that's on board this citizen science device is so incredibly sensitive that it can measure movements finer than the thickness of a human hair. And so if the Earth wiggles because there's an earthquake, say, in Japan or down here in Costa Rica, and it's of a considerable magnitude, let's say magnitude 6 or 7, 8, or 9, you will see that earthquake on Raspberry Shakes all over the world, especially in areas that are generally not experiencing earthquakes. And so the Raspberry Shake has been this beautifully fun unlock for earthquake enthusiasts and just people who are interested in technology in general, for being able to see what's happening in the Earth with regards to earthquakes around the world.
I see. Right. And okay, so now in this device, I was just kind of researching this, thinking about it, just because I'm a nerd like this, and I like to know how things work. But for people listening out there, they've heard this term, Geophone. Is that the sensor that's inside the device? And basically how that works, maybe you can explain it here, but to me it's sort of like it's like your speaker at home, but kind of in reverse, where you have something that's vibrating in a magnetic field that's sensing the movement of the Earth, the frequency, right? And that generates a little electrical pulse, and that's what you're sensing. Is that what's in the Raspberry Shake, or is it a different technology?
Yeah, it's a geophone, and a geophone is the size of a film canister.
Mm-hmm.
For those in your audience that are older than 30, they'll remember film canisters.
Yeah, what's film?
Or it's the size of a little smaller than a D-cell battery.
Right.
And this inside of it is a mass and a magnet and a coil.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the magnet essentially moves through the coil moves around the magnet. It generates a current, and inside this unit you have basically this mass and this magnet suspended by a very fine spring that's super sensitive. So as you walk around the house, you can think of it it'll start moving up and down just because of the impact of your feet on the floor. And it begins to register all that movement, and it does it so in real time. And then that information is sent over a wire into a very small computer called the Raspberry Pi, which some people in your audience may be familiar with. Mm-hmm. It's a computer that's about the size of a credit card. These are famous in the do-it-yourself technology communities, which there are plenty of in the United States. And then that information is sent out to a central server. And then all that data is kind of displayed and available at any time and then used to detect earthquakes.
Gotcha. So one of my thinking through this thing, one of my questions was, if it's sitting in your house, like where you locate these things, first of all, and if it's sitting in your house or if it's not very isolated, my assumption is, I don't know anything about seismology, but you can explain it, is that you'd want to have sensors in locations that are very isolated so that you can listen very quietly, very small signals from the earth, right? And if you put it in your house and you're close to a busy street, whatever, isn't the data or the sensing information going to be overwhelmed by all that noise? How do you actually know that you're sensing earthquakes or movements of the earth?
Yeah, this is a very common perception, even among seismologists, that these earthquake devices, these seismographs, need to be in really quiet locations in order to be able to detect earthquakes. And what we found through our experience with the Raspberry Shake network, where we have a lot of people who are installing Raspberry Shakes just in their home or in their office, where you have the wash machine running and you have the dogs running around the house, and there's traffic outside, and there's a lot of cultural noise. There's a lot of noise generated by what's happening around you, is that the instrumentation still works extremely well. So you can, because of the differences in the kind of the fingerprints, so to speak, of the different signals that you can detect, like your footprints and your washing machine and an earthquake, they're totally different.
Different profile.
And so you can register different profile. You can register them all simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And then if there is an earthquake that's local to you, let's say it's within 100 kilometers or so, or 100 miles, it will still show up beautifully on the Raspberry Shake. And let's say, usually maybe the house, moves quite a bit, you would think, from your moving around it.
Sure.
Right? An earthquake actually will move that house so much more, even if you're not able to perceive it yourself. It'll on the data from the Raspberry Shake, you'll see that earthquake kind of standing head and shoulders above the noise that you generally have at home.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah, extremely sensitive.
Yeah, you can filter it out essentially, sort of all the background noise or the stuff that you're not looking for specifically, right?
Yeah, we have automated filters for looking at earthquakes based on distance, because as an earthquake travels through the earth, you lose all the high frequency information. Mm-hmm. It's like, you can kind of think of it like if there was a concert and the concert was in your neighborhood, and you were right next to the concert, you'd be able to hear everything, the high pitch of the singer, the bass guitarist. But the further you get away, the less information you're going to be able to hear, and you might only be left when you're 10 miles away hearing the bass,
Correct.
like
Yeah.
the booming bass of the concert. And that's because with distance, all of the high frequency stuff gets filtered out by the earth and the atmosphere.
Right.
And the same as with earthquakes. So if you detect that earthquake, for example, in Ohio that happened in Japan, you're only going to see the really long period or really low frequency information from that earthquake, the kind that's making the earth wobble at a hole at distance.
Right. Yeah. I gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, that explains it. It makes a lot of sense, but I was just, first thinking through it, I'm like, how's this going to work really? But you know what you're doing, so obviously. So all right, so let's dig into this. You mentioned Raspberry Pi before, okay? And for people that aren't really familiar with that, I've heard of it for now. It's, I don't know when it came out, maybe 10, 15 years ago by now, something like that. But I think it was a small computer that was built as a development platform. I think initially targeted towards students or hobbyists, kind of that nature. Is that still the case? And this is, where the name Raspberry Shake comes from, of course. But can you explain what that is and what it costs so people kind of understand, like, what might be accessible to them if they have an interest in making their own application, for example?
Oh, absolutely. So the Raspberry Pi computer is, you're right, it came out between 10 and 15 years ago. When it came out into a market where these types of solutions were larger and cost hundreds of dollars. Most of them were over $500. And when they came to market with a ticket price of, I think, $40 or $35, pretty similar to where they are today.
Right.
I think a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B might be $40 or $50 today.
Right.
So they're really inexpensive. They're very powerful. You can operate most people do at home in the United States. You can do it on a Raspberry Pi, surfing the internet and doing your bills and things like that.
Right.
And they're very powerful because they make it very easy for people who are tinkers and hobbyists to connect sensors to the computer. So you can connect a weather sensor, you can connect a seismograph, you can connect a temperature sensor, a wind sensor, any number of things to a Raspberry Pi. So there's just hundreds and hundreds of do-it-yourself, do-it-at-home projects that are linked to the Raspberry Pi.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, that's what I thought was, I guess, interesting. Like I remember it, I've heard about it. I know people have created sort of, demonstration applications, more student-oriented stuff. I haven't heard much about it in terms of using it as a real platform for a business like yours, for Raspberry Shake, for example. I'm like, oh, okay, so people are really starting to integrate this into larger business models, for example.
In the beginning, we were a little hesitant because we were looking for a solution as a company that was industrial.
Right.
And so we were looking in the very beginning at we were looking at solutions in the beginning that were similar in size, a computer is the size of a credit card, to the Raspberry Pi. We had been using for many years the BeagleBone Black, which is a more industrial version than the Raspberry Pi. And so we were a little skeptical. And when we started out our project, we actually tested the Raspberry Pi extensively, and we were really surprised that even though they weren't claiming it to be an industrial solution, that the Raspberry Pi is in fact industrial grade by experience. I mean, I have Raspberry Pis and seismographs that have been operating 24/7 for over a decade, and they're still going. It's really impressive. And so when we actually were thinking of bringing the Raspberry Shake product to market, we were going to launch on a crowdsourcing campaign platform. So we chose Kickstarter at that time. And Kickstarter is just a platform where you can go in, you can post your business idea, and you basically take pre-orders for the product that doesn't exist yet. And when we launched it, we figured, okay, well, we want to create a personal seismograph that people can use at home. We're going to tie it to the Raspberry Pi computer, and we know that millions and millions of people across the United States and Europe have these at home. and we're assuming that they have them, and maybe they would be willing to repurpose them to create a seismograph.
I gotcha.
And so we tied it to the Raspberry Pi. We launched the campaign, and we suspect that that's one of the reasons why it was so successful, that it was tied to that computer.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. There's an installed base. Maybe there's a network effect that would happen with all that stuff. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, well, I want you to keep talking about this citizen science aspect, but I want to read something here first, okay? Because I like this kind of idea that's on your website here. So Raspberry Shake brings the joy of science and technology to the people, empowering them to collaborate across borders and be their own independent source of earthquake information. As citizen scientists and hobbyists, we have grown into the largest community-powered seismic network in the world, monitoring earthquakes globally, unrestrained, I like this word, unrestrained by borders, politics, and money. So can you talk about the network and sort of the value of the information that individuals can gather as a citizen scientist or a citizen engineer, whatever, however you want to look at it, what people are doing, and what different value that unlocks or unleashes for people around the world, for nation states, for governments, for local governments, but also for citizens to understand the world better.
That'll be my pleasure. Yeah, this is, I hadn't heard that in a long time. I wrote that many years ago. I probably wrote that 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, citizen science at its core is about the gee whiz part as much as it is about decentralizing something that has been very centralized for a long time.
Right.
And the classic examples of citizen science, for example, are in astronomy, where you have a huge number of volunteer and weekend warrior and amateur astronomers that are always looking up at the sky, they're studying things that are interest to them, and they're really putting in a ton of man hours, and that has generated over and over again breakthroughs in astronomical observation and our understanding of how the universe works. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the classic example for me. And there's also been citizen science efforts that have been successful in many different applications in science. The Raspberry Shake network itself is so expansive. It has thousands of participants across 75 or more countries. It is arguably one of the most successful citizen science initiatives, given the amount of uptime it has. Like, we've been running now for 8 years, and how many people are involved, and the impact it's had in the scientific community itself. So prior to the existence of Raspberry Shake, if we were to go back a decade, in order to build a seismic network to monitor earthquakes, you had to have state-level funding. Right. Because a well-installed scientific-grade instrument at that time would have run you about $100,000. You would have had to build a seismic vault out of concrete to house it, have redundant power systems, maybe have a satellite connection at the time, way before SpaceX was offering satellite connections for $50 a month.
Right.
Things were very expensive. You had to put in all this infrastructure, and then you had to buy a seismograph and a data logger that probably cost you between $20,000 and $50,000. And so now Raspberry Shake comes along, and we're like, we're going to build a seismograph, and we're going to do it for a few $100s. And it's going to be scientific grade, professional, and you're going to be able to now use this in your institute, your government, your USGS, mm-hmm. to use that same budget that you spent on buying one station to buy hundreds. And then you're also going to be able to afford this as an educator or as a citizen scientist, as a hobbyist. And that completely changed the game for how seismology is being done, because suddenly, if you're a researcher, you can answer a whole bunch of interesting questions because you have a denser network. And if you're a hobbyist, now you don't actually have to depend on anyone other than yourself for detecting earthquakes all around the world. And there's a part you read about the joy of seismology.
Right.
this is like the most rewarding element of the Raspberry Shake network is this element here is the ability to as a professional seismologist that has benefited through most of his career in using these government networks that are just cost millions of dollars to put together, to be able to experience what I consider the joy of doing seismology, of learning about earthquakes and learning about how the earth works. And then suddenly everyone is able to do that. Not everyone, but many people are able to do that at home, especially in the United States, where you can spend a few $100s on a hobby, and that's pretty standard, and that can unlock for you the ability to detect earthquakes anywhere in the world. And now we have a network where there's this beautiful confluence of the hobbyists, the educators that want to bring earthquakes and geoscience into the classroom, and the professionals all together in a single network. All that data is publicly available, and now you can begin to see how the hobbyists are learning, the researchers are using the data to push science.
Right.
A really wonderful example of this was during COVID. There was a quieting of the world, right? There was suddenly all the cultural noise of us driving back and forth to work was gone.
Right.
Many of the factories shut down. So the earth was really quiet. And it was so interesting to witness on X.com, which was Twitter.com still back then, scientists beginning to collaborate with Raspberry Shake hobbyists to study this anthropogenic effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put together and published on Twitter a scientific paper that was then accepted in Science, the most prestigious science journal out there, using a lot of Raspberry Shake data from the network, using data from professionals and hobbyists to express new scientific discoveries.
Right. Wow. That's so interesting. I was just going to ask you. So, like, this makes me think about. Thanks for kind of putting the context around that, by the way. And it's so interesting the times we live in, the deflationary effect of technology as technology keeps evolving, that is allowing all these things you might have dreamed of just a handful of years ago that was way out of reach for the average person is now like right in the palm of your hand. It's right in your lap, and but it makes me think about who the customers are of these devices that you're selling, of the network data, for example. You must have different sets of customers. Like, who do you really see that's, in terms of your market share or growth or whatever, who's really pulling this now from you? Is it professionals? Is it the state governments? Are the governments buying the data off the network? Like, how do you look at that in terms of your business model?
Okay, so the business model has, or the business itself, the market, we divide into three main categories, and then there's many subcategories.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the professionals. They are our biggest market.
Okay.
The educators are our second biggest market, so education, and then hobbyists are the third biggest market. But they're not one third, but they're very close. The hobbyists are a serious part of our market. It's one of the most interesting things is that after our Kickstarter campaign happened, well, actually, I'll step back a moment just to explain the hobbyist market a little bit more, and then we'll talk about the pro market.
Okay.
And then how they interface. When we launched our Kickstarter campaign, we were thinking, if we sell 20 of these units to our seismic friends, that'll be cool, because we really want to learn about this crowdfunding thing and this new thing that Kickstarter is doing.
Right.
And the part of being interested in bringing a seismograph into the home was kind of secondary. We had no idea that people out there in the world would be interested in the kind of stuff that we nerd out about every day.
Okay.
So I was in a business meeting with my partner at the time, and I was actually discouraging putting a lot of company resources into the Raspberry Shake, because I said to him, no, like, I don't think there's a lot of people out there in the world who's going to want to study earthquakes from home.
Right.
Well, I was so wrong, because we did about 800 units on sale in that campaign, and that we had to deliver in 3 months. It was wild.
Okay.
And then since then, I was out every year. I was thinking the hobbyist market, like we're going to saturate it. We're going to saturate it.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't happened. We keep unlocking new communities. Like, for example, ham radio operators absolutely love Raspberry Shake.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because of the signal processing, the being able, the transmitting information over long distances, like this is through the earth instead of the air, but
Right.
but there's a lot of overlap. And so the hobbyist community is really strong. Years into the project, the education community came online, which was great because it provided us another market and another motivation to continue building, given that we were starting to see photographs and videos of students learning about science with Raspberry Shake. That was very powerful. And then the professional market's always been there. When we were in the initial days, when we did our Kickstarter campaign, we had really designed something that was truly hobbyist. It was not professional. That was our intention. But when there were 800 or so orders, we met again and we said, wow, this is the opportunity that we wanted for many years of designing seismographs. It's actually to create something where you can do really high network density on a professional level. So let's scrap all of our designs and let's design a solution for all of these hobbyists that is professional grade.
Right.
So that we can meet the needs of all the markets at once.
Right. I see.
And
oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it's so interesting. Well, I'm sure it gives the professionals a different capability of where you might have had access to, like, 3 key locations that you were listening to that were built out in those, much more expensive structures, much more sophisticated, but you're missing all this little detailed data because you only have 3 sensors. You only have 3 locations. But now, obviously, you can go and look at this network, and there can be hundreds or thousands of, it just gives you that granularity look into what's really going on, right?
yeah, it gives you great granularity. There's a sense of community and belonging. It's really fun to be a professional seismologist and to have access to all the citizen scientists and their enthusiasm.
Right.
And then vice versa. The citizen scientists on X and Blue Sky have access directly to the professionals that are on those platforms too. And they're talking about science, they're talking about earthquakes. There's a lot of conversation that's going on. The other thing, a lot of times when I'm talking about the professional market, I'm thinking about the USGS. I'm thinking about those government agencies with the deep pockets that were always able to afford having seismic networks. There's another part of the world, the less developed world, that was never able to have seismic networks because of the expense.
Right.
And then Raspberry Shake has unlocked that for them as well. We see seismic networks coming online in countries that have never had them before. And they're exclusively being built with Raspberry Shakes because they're just much more affordable.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's what's cool about when you sort of discover new markets or new kind of penetrations of this technology. It's like, they didn't know to ask for it. They didn't know that it was available, but now that it is, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, there's a real need there that maybe was underappreciated before. So that's really cool thing about it. Well, okay. So thanks for describing that, and so I can figure out how this whole business model works, because that's interesting too. But I want to rewind a little bit now, because you weren't, you didn't go to school thinking that, hey, someday I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to release a product called the Raspberry Shake. I don't think that was kind of in your sights when you were going to college, as we were talking before.
That detail,
right? So let's talk a little bit about how you got here, because what are you doing in Costa Rica? What were you doing in Ecuador? I know you're originally from New York area. What were you thinking, and how did you end up here?
Yeah, well, I'm in Costa Rica now. My businesses are in Panama. I live between Panama and Costa Rica.
Okay.
And so I spend a lot of my time in Panama, and then Costa Rica is kind of for when I want to just get away and be on the ocean. So how did I get here? When I was in my very early 20s, now I'm in my very early 40s. When I was in my early 20s, so half a life ago, I finished university, and I thought, well, I was coming to the point where I was finishing university, and I flew down to Ecuador to present my research at that time, which was in geochemistry. I was doing research on volcanoes, the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. And I went to this conference. I'd never traveled outside of the US and Europe. I'd never been to Latin America. And I walked around Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, and I just fell in love with the place. Everything was magical and new. A language was being spoken I didn't understand. The mountain, there was snow-clad giants, like huge volcanoes on the horizon on the equator. Right. And then there was the dance and the science and the opportunities with the local geophysical institute that was monitoring volcanoes. They had, I don't know, 3 or 4 active volcanoes in the country. And I thought, I'm going to go and live in Ecuador and take a year off. So I took out all my PhD applications, put them aside, flew down to Ecuador, and then I lived in Ecuador for, the plan was 10 months. I made it a year and a half on the amount of money that I'd saved. I was waiting tables and building decks before I went down in my early 20s.
It's fairly low cost. Is that a right?
It's super low cost.
Okay, so that's cool because you can hang out there and not feel overwhelmed. All right, good.
I was living like a king, my routine was I was working on monitoring volcanoes every single day of the week. Okay. So a lot of times I'd be at a volcano observatory in front of an active volcano. Mm-hmm. And then on the weekends, I would climb up, like Friday night, I would climb up to one of these snow-clad volcanoes, some of the highest points in the world, and I would climb them. And then I would come down and by breakfast the next day, sleep on the mountain in the daytime, and then I would go dance salsa all night long on Saturday night, and then rinse and repeat. You know, I don't know how I did it because I had a lot of energy back then.
Well, it's good to be in your 20s.
But it's good to be in your 20s.
Amazing, yeah.
And then I knew I loved it. I came back to the United States. I kind of didn't feel like I belonged in the sense anymore. So I went back to Ecuador. I came back. I did a little work in oil and gas in Houston, Texas. Mm-hmm. That was really fun. Returned to Ecuador again. Then left to go do my master's, then came back again. So I was just yo-yoing for 5 or 6 years between Latin America and the United States.
Gotcha.
And then it came time to find work.
Right.
And that was hard.
Yeah, at some point you're like, okay.
I just finished my master's. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you're like, I need a career. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do this thing. I've been monitoring volcanoes. This is really fun. I've replaced my passion for chemistry with physics. I've gotten a degree in that now. I'm back here. Let's do this.
Okay.
And then there was a political shift in Ecuador, and I wasn't able to renew my visa. Oh. And I also wasn't able to find work because the work I was doing for the government and monitoring volcanoes was they were paying me kind of once a year. And that was not really resolving things financially.
Right.
So that's when I started to look for a job.
I gotcha. Yeah, interesting. Well, I wanted you to share your job story with everyone because when you were talking about it, I mean, I've had some of these experiences myself where you're just, there's all these opportunities in life, and it's up to you to figure out whether they compute in your mind properly or not. Like when you're presented with these things, and it's like once you make the shift, obviously you'd already made the shift in your mind of the lifestyle and how you wanted to live and what was important to you. But when you're going through school and just getting out, you might still be kind of the way I think of it now is there's this 20th century model that has worked for many years, right? The last 70, 80 years, something like that, where it's like, hey, you go to college, you get a job, you work, you have a pension at a company, et cetera. I think what's interesting now about the age we live in, the internet's here, technology is driving down, it's deflationary in terms of cost of opportunities of technologies that you can play around with. And you can see the light now in terms of being more autonomous in very different ways. So maybe like, I remember you told me the story about when you were interviewing with the oil and gas company around Houston, what you were thinking, how you were feeling before you decided to kind of dive into this entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, well, when I was living in Ecuador, and I was looking for what to do next, and I was spending a lot of my time on online forums helping out seismologists with installing different software packages that were very complicated, and just trying to create a niche for myself in that way.
I see.
And a gentleman who was starting a company in Panama reached out to me. This is the company that would end up spinning off Raspberry Shake in the end, many years later. And he said, I see you online. You and I are actually like competing to answer. I do this for a business, and I'm older. I've already retired. I've created this little company that is doing seismology. I think that you would be great. Why don't you come and join me 50-50 as a business partner, and we'll build out a company together. And I flew to him in Panama, and we met, we talked, and I felt into it. And at that point, I kind of had not considered going back into being an entrepreneur. I had been earlier in my life, but that wasn't really on my radar. And I asked if I can just have some time to let that incubate a little bit.
Right.
And during that incubation period, I flew to New Zealand and I flew to Houston to interview for 2 different jobs. I flew to Auckland to interview for a job for a geothermal company, and I flew to Houston to interview for a job for an oil and gas company. Houston, I got there and they made me an offer in 2011 for $150,000 sign-on salary to be a geophysicist. And that was an enormous amount of money. It still is a lot of money.
A lot of money.
It was more money than I'd ever. I was surviving on $1,000 a month in Ecuador. I was just like, this was.
You're like,
this is breaking my brain a little bit. So right. I'm in the interview and the orientation, and there's full dental package. There's a full health package. They even have eye. Everything's in there.
Right.
And then there's this one part, and it said 2 weeks vacation. And I said to the person who was going over the remuneration package with me, I said, well, I really value my free time and my vacation, and I'd like to have 5 or 6 weeks, but I'm willing to take 4. Can you take some of the money back and then give me 4 weeks vacation to start? And they leaned in very quietly, and they said, let me give you some advice here at ExxonMobil. Don't ask about vacation for the first 5 years. Put in your time, and then you'll get some more vacation. And I slid the envelope across the table, and I said, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate.
Right.
I appreciate you flying me here. I appreciate everything that you're offering, but this doesn't align with me."
Right.
And
how did you feel at that time? Okay, because obviously maybe you felt you didn't have anything to lose because you were living very cheaply at that point. But how does that square with your other responsibilities in life at that point, or how you thought you were going to make it? I mean, that's still a tough decision. I think you didn't have anything exactly to go to, right?
My student loans would have evaporated in 6 months or less,
right, with
this job. But I wasn't at all motivated by money in my early 20s, even my early 30s. Like I didn't have I'd say I have a healthier relationship with money now. Money for me back then was bad. It was something, it was always a struggle in my childhood. I didn't want anything to do with it. So money wasn't a motivation, but my free time was a big motivation. And the irony of this is that I eventually accepted the partnership in Panama. And then, of course, who's the boss now? I am.
Right.
I go to Panama. I do this thing for the company, and then suddenly I'm in charge of my time and my future and all of that. And for the first bunch of years building the business, I took no vacation, worked insane 80, 90-hour weeks, and was making $2,000. I paid myself $2,000 a month.
Right.
So I turned down ExxonMobil for this reason, and then I go and I do that to myself. So it's like, Branden, what did you actually value? And in the end, it was my freedom, right?
Right.
My freedom to decide what to do with my time.
Okay, this is a great revelation. I love it. I mean, this is the journey that we all have to go on. We all have to figure this out along the way, like what's really important, and it changes from day to day or from period of your life. Maybe after a while you're like, okay, you know what, money's more important now because I got to figure this out. it's less important when you're in your 20s because you don't really know the value of things and you're trying to figure it out, right?
Right.
That's so
Retirement's not on your mind.
yeah, retirement's not in your mind yet. You're like, whatever, I'll figure it out. And then you're like, wait a second. Okay, I see if I stay on this path, I'm going to have this kind of lifestyle or that kind of lifestyle. I got to adjust things as needed. Well, this is great to hear, man. Okay, so maybe this leads me into one of the other areas I wanted to cover with you because of your experience in Panama, Costa Rica, and Ecuador, whatever, and kind of expanding your view of the world, your mindset, and some of the things you've gotten into. Like when we first talked to you, you mentioned something about spirituality, and I think people that are listening to this podcast, the Reinvention Revolution, right? They're interested in probably reinventing themselves somehow, or hearing about how others go about it because they maybe need help on their journey or insights. What do you feel about that? What you mentioned before in terms of spirituality or things you've able to realize about yourself along this journey that you're taking now? How's that impacted your business or your kind of view of the world?
Oh, it's impacted everything, and it seems like your audience and I and you were all on the same journey. This wasn't always true for me, but it's true now that the only thing you can depend on in life is that things change.
Yeah,
everything changes. And before I began my spiritual path, I basically had the attitude in my late 30s, that's when I began it, maybe 3 or 4 years ago only, that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I didn't want to change. I was just stuck in my ways. And that's stagnation, right? And that's not good because stagnation means that everything starts to wither on the vine.
Right.
And so change is really important. My journey has been about embracing change and about a lot of times when I'm trying to grow in my entrepreneurial pursuits, I end up touching walls and hitting ceilings, the glass ceiling. And you're like, well, what's this all about? Why can't I rise above this?
Right.
And almost every time I've encountered that it's tied to some experience that I had in my childhood that was traumatic, or there's some limiting belief or some belief I got from society that actually creates this false ceiling for myself. And I've found that different spiritual modalities and trauma healing modalities have been very instrumental for me to overcome the limiting beliefs and the false ceilings. And so I've done a lot of work on myself in the trauma space, guided with therapists in the realm of what they call parts work. So one of the modalities I'm using, parts work.
Parts work.
It's where it's where you recognize that you're actually composed of many versions of yourself.
Okay.
And so if you've ever had an experience where you suddenly are triggered by something and you get really mad.
Oh, yeah.
And you were just really happy and you're like, where the hell did that come from? Well, that's a part of you, maybe from your childhood, that's pissed about something that never got resolved.
Right.
And so I've done that. I've done mindset coaching, which has been incredibly instrumental, fundamentally changing the way that I view the world and I think about things.
Right.
For example, shifting out of the mentality that everything has to come from struggle and coming into an easefulness in your body. So that I've worked on the mind, I've worked on the emotional. I've also engaged with many different types of psychedelics and plant medicine.
Okay.
And this was one of the most interesting things because it was one of the great initiations on my spiritual journey was sitting with ayahuasca. And I went into sitting with ayahuasca in Costa Rica with my partner at the time. She was another very instrumental part of my growth. But we went in together, and I was so stubborn. If science hadn't proved it, it didn't exist. None of everything else was woo-woo and just didn't apply to me.
I understand. Yeah.
And I basically if the scientific method hasn't been able to show evidence that this thing is true, then I'm not even gonna entertain it as a possibility. And then suddenly I go on this journey with DMT and ayahuasca, and I saw the world. I came out of that seeing the world in a totally different place, and immediately understood that there is way more there that meets the eye and meets my limited senses.
That's right.
There's so much more mystery, and I was humbled by that. And I just, from that point on, I've just embraced like all kinds of different forms of spirituality, because the recognition that there are forces and things at play so far beyond my ability to understand them, and I need to be humble in the face of that and recognize that.
Right. Wow. Well, it's amazing. I mean, I'm so glad you crossed that bridge, man. And I think people that are listening out there, maybe they're tweaking a little bit or whatever, thinking like, oh man, is that me? Was I that person that's not open to this? Or they might be hearing it and be like, yes, I know exactly what he's talking about. You know, this happened to me, or that can be so fruitful in your life. Thanks for sharing that. Not everybody would be willing to, or was open to share that kind of stuff, just from a personal, kind of journey point of view. But I think it's important to hear. And like you said, it's the only thing that's constant is change. And I feel like, right now, this moment in time that we're living, things are moving so fast that you have to really keep changing and working on yourself. It's like the only way to survive almost now. Where before things were, I think it was probably things were moving a little slower, and so you could kind of get by not being so adaptive, perhaps. I think that's the greatest human quality is we were able to adapt to the world faster and better than most other species out there, I guess.
One of the things that keeps us from adapting is fear.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you take AI right now, so many people are afraid of AI. But if you come into the AI space with curiosity, there's so much fun and joy to be experienced in engaging with AI. There is so much liberation that comes from automating some of the menial tasks that took you away from what you really value in life through artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so, AI is the most, I think is the most timely example of this. Is if you can overcome that fear and you can begin to embrace it, you might actually find that you unlock some true potential there, some things that are waiting for you.
Right. Oh, well, I think no doubt about it. I mean, I know that in particular, specifically for AI, I know I need to play around with it more. Like I've experienced it a little bit, and I see the value of it, and I see how things are changing. If I was early in my career, I'd be like, I have to take a deep dive into this and find out everything about it I can. Because
100%.
Because either you're going to be replaced by it, or but if you become an expert, you're going to see the unlimited opportunities that arise and that are available now. It's just mind blowing, really. Branden, look, it's been great having you on the podcast. There's always a couple of questions I want to get towards the end here that I want to ask people, and one is, now that you've shared a bunch, is can you share a reinvention revelation, that's what I call it with people, that's something that you've realized about yourself or about business or about technology along the way that can help others in their journey as they're trying to reinvent themselves with this crazy world going on?
Easy. There's a very strong signal in the noise for this one.
All right.
The biggest thing that ever happened to me, and it immediately makes me emotional when I think about it, is coming into the full realization that this whole idea of if you want it done right, do it yourself, is bullshit. It is totally the one thing as a human, as an inventor, as an entrepreneur that will hold you back and limit you is this belief that you're the best.
Right.
And I don't know if I could curse on your podcast. Sorry.
Sure, go ahead, man.
but there's the strongest realization I ever had. It happened over many years. It wasn't overnight.
Yeah. I
remember one of the most important moments was I sat there with one of the older members of my staff, Don Alberto. He's in his 70s now. Mm-hmm. This was probably a decade ago. And I said, Alberto, I got a problem. And we went over to the whiteboard. And at that time, I think we just hired our 9th employee. And everyone was working for me. directly.
Yeah.
Because I needed to control everything that everyone did, because I needed to ensure that it was the highest quality work.
Right. Right.
And this is the storyline in my head.
Right.
And so I drew on the whiteboard everyone's name, and I drew an arrow to myself, and I was like, this is this ninth person, and I no longer have the bandwidth. I'm working so many hours,
Yeah.
and I can't do it. Like, what do we do? And then we talked about putting in a company structure, and then I went on that journey of being like, oh wow, if I'm gonna have a manager, then I need to trust them. And that was a long journey in itself. And then I came out on the other side to this very, very magical place that I'm in now, which is everyone on my staff does what they do better than I could have ever done. I hire and I empower the most talented people in those areas. I give them trust. I give them guidance. But in the end, they are the ones that are implementing the solutions in novel and key and incredible ways. And they're all doing that. And I have just completely amplified my abilities as an entrepreneur in that way. And then I can just be there kind of like, guiding the company forward with all these creative minds. So it's funner, it's more expansive.
Right.
And it's less egotistical.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you said it, brother. I mean, right there is like, that's all our journey. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves to get our ego out of the way, keep figuring it out, especially as an entrepreneur. Like, I think of it as like, as an entrepreneur, you're more the conductor of the orchestra. You're not going to be as good as the first violinist on anything. Those first violinists are killers. I mean, they're just amazing, like athletes. You're not going to be even if you're a violinist by trade, you're not going to beat a real serious first violinist of a worldwide orchestra. You're the conductor. So you have to, that's your role, is to find all these experts, bring these experts together, and make a symphony out of it all. So that's a great journey, man. Thanks thanks for sharing that. I got one final question for you. So thinking forward now, of all the stuff that you're doing, whatever, what are you feeling about that is urgent for you these days? That you like, something that you need to get to, that you haven't spent enough time on, or when I say that word, what does that bring up inside you?
Urgency. I try not to feel urgency anymore because I don't like being in the anxiety of it. But
that's fair.
There is still urgency, and it is with AI. I mean, we in the company have multiple experiments right now with artificial intelligence and figuring out how to integrate it into the company at all the different levels that we work at. So directly with our audience, with our consumer base, with our products, with our manufacturing, our day-to-day routines, our CRM, everything, because it's a superpower. And we're like, wow, this superpower is available to us now. How can we all wield this superpower in the most responsible way and yet also the most accelerating way?
Sure.
Like, how can we 10x our productivity everywhere?
Right.
And so that's what feels most urgent. And it's the urgency there is coming, I think, in a lot from not a sense of like, we're going to be left behind, but a sense of, whoa, this is so incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
Like, let's get in front of this.
Right.
Let's play with this. Let's use this. Let's figure out how to integrate it.
Right. Well, I think that comes across. So I was actually like watching some videos on your website, whatever, that you're just an enthusiast, man. You like what you're doing. It's fun, obviously, for you. You could just keep smiling as we're talking back and forth here. And it sounds like AI is just going to be another part of that, which is cool. I think it's a great space to approach it from. Approach all new technologies from. That's just my personal opinion. That's just has always been my mindset. But I want to keep growing my mindset in that regard. And I think it's important, to, like I said before, to keep thinking that way, certainly these days. So, Branden, thanks a lot for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. If people are interested in Raspberry Shake, getting in touch with you, or starting to become a seismologist themselves, or maybe they're a professional listening to this thing and they're like, yeah, I need to know more about him or whatever, where would you tell people to go?
I would invite you to visit us at raspberryshake.org. That's raspberry with RASPBERRY shake.org. And if you want to join the conversation with us, add us /Discord to that. We have a very vibrant Discord community where we're talking about our products, our innovations, and earthquakes and earthquake science. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Jim, for the opportunity to speak to you, to your audience for their time. And yeah, I'd love to connect. Maybe I'll share something for the show notes, a link.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I put links in the show notes, and if there's any interesting things to point people to, definitely share it. So thanks again. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for listening to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more, join our mailing list at jimjimsreinventionrevolution.com. See you next time, and remember, the revolution has just begun. So dig in, embrace the process of reinvention, and start realizing the success you've always dreamed of. Hey, revolutionaries, if you enjoyed today's episode and today's guest, let them know by commenting on their Facebook page, finding their Twitter handle or Instagram feed, and letting them know you heard them on Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, and tell them what you got out of the episode, what you really liked, or how they inspired you. I know they would get a kick out of it and will help others find the same value that you found.